The story begins a few years after the terrifying rktopus, a lab-created hybrid creature, terrorized the Mexican beaches until it was destroyed in a massive explosion. A biologist named Lorena is on a boat at sea, studying the region's ecosystem when her friend Moises pulls up the fishing net and something catches his attention among the captured fish. She finds a pouch of eggs that, by their size, could belong to a great white shark. But what she pulls from the capsule looks like nothing she has ever seen in her life. Although its head is that of a shark, the hatchling also has 8 tentacles. Months later, businessman Rico Siams is at the Cymodyne laboratories where engineers are testing what appears to be some type of aircraft. Hammerstein does not hide his concern as he is responsible for security, and Siams's ideas tend to be very risky. Explaining the current project, he says it is not an aircraft because everything requiring a pilot has been surpassed by drones, and Cymodyne needs to stay ahead of trends. Therefore, the lab's scientists used characteristics of the most ferocious marine animals to fill a sequence of prehistoric DNA, creating the incredible cuda. While Siams proudly presents the feat, engineer Vladimir Futon is the only one who does not stand to applaud, appearing extremely focused on his own computer. Hammerstein becomes worried after hearing that the Pentagon has not been informed, and Siams adds that even the company's board is unaware. He financed the project from his own pocket, predicting so much success that the cuda will be fought over at extremely high prices once its full potential is revealed. While Futon anxiously waits for a data transfer to finish, the other engineer sends a command for the cuda to return to base. A little nervous, he informs the boss that nothing is happening, and it seems the animal is no longer responding to commands. Siams simply tells the engineer to try again. Without anyone noticing, Futon has already packed his personal computer and is taking the elevator. Only after several attempts does the cuda change direction, and now its speed is alarming. The creature is heading straight for the laboratory at 300 kilometers per hour. It crashes through the roof and devours the secretary in front of everyone. Watching his goldmine fly away into the sky, Siams orders Hammerstein to lead a recovery operation. Boarding the helicopter, his colleague asks how long it took for Siams to lose control of his abomination. When Hammerstein says it was less than 7 minutes, the pilot celebrates, as he won the bet. As usual, Hammerstein hangs a photo of his daughter on the dashboard so it will be the last thing he sees if the mission fails. It doesn't take long for the cuda to collide with the helicopter. The team's dilemma is that they are too far away to take it down, and getting closer seems risky as the creature is behaving unpredictably. Over the radio, Hammerstein asks Siams to check the electronics, and he says the internal CPU is intact. However, external commands have been detected, meaning the orders are no longer coming from the Cymodyne laboratory. They still do not know that Futon is controlling the cuda from his computer. In the helicopter, the team suffers its first casualty when one of the shooters is injured and plummets to his death right into the monster's mouth. Furious, his colleagues double their efforts to stop the threat, but even with all their training, the team is no match for that creature. The cuda brings down the helicopter into the sea and then dives, pursuing the survivors under the water. Hammerstein watches the end of all his companions, one by one. He is the only one who manages to swim to the beach, still with the cuda on his tail. Fortunately for him, Futon spills a drink on his computer at that moment, losing the signal. The cuda experiences some sort of malfunction and leaves Hammerstein alone. Meanwhile, hundreds of tourists are having fun at the Mundo del Mar water park, a venture of greedy Munoz. He is Lorena's uncle and can't wait to get rich at the expense of her discovery, an extraordinary specimen of rktopus. The introductory video he commissioned presents marine animals as insatiable beasts and refers to the hybrid as the manifestation of a nightmare. Lorena hates the video and insists that the original idea was to educate the public about marine life. Munoz doesn't want to hear any ecological talk and forces his niece to rehearse her lines, irritated with the animal's apparent shyness. With great difficulty, she makes a tentacle emerge reluctantly, and only for a few moments. Munoz then appeals to the help of Moises, who comes in with live fish in a bag. Lorena tries to warn about the danger of the strategy, but her uncle only cares about the show. As soon as Moises dumps the fish into the water, the gigantic animal emerges furiously, and the poor man barely escapes. Lorena leaves, outraged by all this and late for the dolphin feeding time. Unfortunately, the park visitors are not much better than her uncle. Bob and Nancy are a vacationing couple who insist on disobeying all the biologist's instructions. Bob thinks the interactions with the animals are not very exciting and even calls the dolphin ugly. He then asks about the famous sharktopus advertised in the park's brochures. Containing her uncle's anger, Lorena says the animal is not performing yet. The couple is thrilled with this information as they will be the first to post pictures online. However, Lorena stands firm and declines an extra payment offer. She explains that the sharktopus has not been trained yet and is very sensitive. Laughing at that last part, the tourist says he read all about the species online and knows full well that it is a biological weapon. Lorena denies this information, and she doesn't have much to respond. She knows that the sharktopus will only be ready for the kind of show her uncle wants when its aggression is under control. The problem is dealing with these characteristics of the animal without knowing where they came from. Her boyfriend Rick works as a lifeguard at the park and is always dividing his attention between the marine animals, almost jealous. He isn't very impressed with the latest video, in which she almost proves that the animal can read. In the office, Munoz is trying to appease his creditors over the phone. He assures them that the sharktopus will save the park from the red and all debts will be paid. As soon as he hangs up, another unpleasant conversation awaits him, as Bob and Nancy are very dissatisfied. After complaining about the slides, the food, and the price, they threaten to leave only a 1-star review. Bob says the worst part was the annoying biologist who refused his bribe for a sneak peek at the new sea monster, as if she were above money. Seeing dollars rain down on his desk like that, Munoz rushes to please the customers and even claims that he himself is never above money. Following Munoz to the private tank, the couple isn't even that excited to see the creature anymore. Nancy is tired of walking and sits at the water's edge, while Bob tries to cheer her up with the chance of a viral video. While trying to wake the celebrity with some fish, Munoz asks her not to get too close to the water, but the husband is offended by the reprimand. At that moment, 2 tentacles emerge from the tank, pulling and poking the woman. Nancy screams in terror, and Bob rushes to help her. The two leave furiously, saying their lawyers will be in touch very soon. Disheartened, Munoz sits on the barrel that keeps spilling chlorine into the tank. At night, Rick takes Lorena out to dinner and gets annoyed with her inability to live in the moment, always thinking about work. She says her mother washed dishes in that same restaurant, working hard for her daughter's diploma. Now she wants it to mean something better than just sucking up to rich tourists, and the sharktopus is her chance to be heard in the scientific community. The next day, Hammerstein returns to the lab, and Siams greets him with insensitive comments about the loss of his companions. To make matters worse, he has no intention of informing the authorities that there is a flying monster on the loose, as that kind of thing gets you locked up. Saying he hired Hammerstein precisely to avoid problems, he concludes that this is all still his responsibility. The radar shows that the approximate location of the Terracuda isn't far from populated areas. Hammerstein says someone might have seen it in the sky and asks Siams to tune in to local news. Reporter Veronica Vegas is interviewing Bob and Nancy about the terrible trauma they went through. This is not the news the two were looking for, but Siams recognizes the hybrid monster that spread terror across Mexico a few years ago. He is surprised to learn that a living specimen still exists, and a new dangerous idea begins to form in his mind. Within hours, they arrive at the water park with a detailed plan on how to use the sharktopus to neutralize the Terracuda. Munoz is alarmed by the American's speech, talking about illegal possession of secret weapons and federal crimes. But Siams quickly abandons the threats and explains the partnership as a business opportunity, which works much faster. Munoz even suggests they talk to Lorena since she is the only one who knows how to tame the creature. Laughing at the simplistic idea, Siams explains that he will insert a neurotransmitter into the sharktopus. This will transform it into a destruction machine focused solely on the target, which in this case is the other hybrid. When Lorena arrives, the sharktopus is floating, and the operation is about to begin. She becomes so upset that her uncle has to hold her back. Hammerstein follows Siams's instructions over the radio, as the boss refuses to get close to dangerous animals. Realizing that his niece might compromise the operation and consequently the payment, Munoz locks Lorena in a room without a phone. A twinge of conscience makes him ask if the sharktopus will be okay, but Hammerstein only promises to bring back whatever is left of the animal. Then Syams gives him a suitcase full of money and makes it clear that he is buying his silence. On the beach, 3 divers are preparing to dive down to the wreck of a ship. The youngest girl is scared, but the other 2 swear it is safe. They proceed with the adventure, unaware that the sharktopus has just been released into the sea. Its opponent arrives shortly after, and the 2 immediately devour the trio of divers. Then the duel begins, and the sharktopus takes the advantage, engulfing the pterocuda with its tentacles. It struggles until it escapes and shoots to the surface. The rival tries to pull it back by its tail, but fails. Watching the duel through binoculars, Syams and Hammerstein aren't sure who they are rooting for anymore. Meanwhile, Lorena manages to open the door and calls Rick with the bad news, asking him to start evacuating the bay. The beaches are crowded, and no one takes the rumor about the sharktopus seriously. That changes when a famous TV host begins to throw a tantrum over a ball that hit his head. He stops speaking abruptly, and a scaly tentacle emerges from his mouth, to the horror of the beachgoers. Emerging from the water, the sharktopus even bites the top of the victim, spitting the head directly into the volleyball game. It is evident that the overall situation is heading toward catastrophe, and Veronica Vegas can hardly wait for it to happen to boost her career. Following Lorena, she discovers that the person responsible is Syams and asks a colleague to gather information. At El Diablo Beach, Bob and Nancy are still complaining about their vacation when the pterocuda arrives spreading terror. At the same time, Hammerstein and Syams discover that Futon has sabotaged the project. He is part of a terrorist group and is still trying to regain control of the pterocuda. Giving up on their bad trip, Bob and Nancy decide to head back home, and it is precisely their plane that the pterocuda chooses to attack. The flight attendant barely has time to say everything will be fine before the explosion. At that same moment, Moises is telling his boss that the couple is indeed suing, but Munoz is unfazed. He is so full of cash that he even decides to close the park for good. The sharktopus' next attack is on the beach where Rick works. The same tourists who ignored the warnings learn their lesson in a horrible way. As if the tentacles grabbing people weren't enough, the pterocuda decides to join in. After the humans have been swept off the surface, the 2 hybrids grapple underwater. Through the binoculars, Hammerstein sees the pterocuda emerge dazed and topple a tower. Back on the attack, it grabs the sharktopus and tears out the neurotransmitter, ruining all of Syams's plans. The businessman is already ready to flee the country and leave this mess to someone else, but Hammerstein won't let a weapon like the pterocuda fall into Futon's hands. Coincidentally, Lorena is passing by at that moment, and Hammerstein recognizes her. Remembering what Munoz said about her influence over the sharktopus, Syams decides to kidnap her to help them control the creatures. Lorena protests and refuses to cooperate, but then realizes the radar shows the deadly duo heading toward the beaches. At the same time, Rick is rescuing the sole survivor of the last attack. When Hammerstein makes a stop to gather the equipment for his new plan, Lorena sees her boyfriend returning from the water. As Syams has just intercepted a suspicious activity that should be Futon, he doesn't even notice when his hostage exits the van. She helps Rick with the rescue and asks him to stay with her, explaining that she has been kidnapped. But now it's his turn to choose work over her, saying people need his help. Lorena loses her chance to escape as Syams is already right behind her. The 2 watch Rick's bravery as he refuses to give up on saving the beachgoers even under the terrible shadow of the pterocuda. Unfortunately, his courage is punished by the creature's claws, and Lorena still has to endure her captor's cruel jokes about natural selection. Hammerstein then explains that there is a chance to end this nightmare, but it is really just one, so they cannot miss. He tries to convince Lorena to contribute her knowledge, appealing to the lives that might be saved. Studying the local map, she concludes that the sharktopus is heading back to the water park and panics to help her friends. However, Syams discovers what Futon is trying to do, and it is even worse than they feared. He plans to activate the pterocuda's protocol that will guide it to a nuclear power plant to incite a disaster. Lorena is forced to admit that this is more serious than a possible attack in the park's waters. What she still doesn't know is that the Mundo del Mar is almost empty, and her uncle has not left because he is looking for her. However, who he encounters is the sharktopus. The animal attacks in the way that hurts him the most, spilling his money out of the bag. Munoz is pulled into the tank just moments before Moises arrives, who also ends up in trouble. The sharktopus then calmly leaves the park, swimming through the adjacent channels and tearing apart random targets. Arriving at the inn where Futon is hiding, Lorena pretends to be a waitress to avoid raising suspicions and thus grants access for the other two. Siams begins scouring the computer while Futon refuses to provide information, claiming he was hired for this service, which makes him not much different from Hammerstein. On TV, Veronica Vegas is covering the plane crash and blaming Siams for all the tragedies. He is outraged when Lorena confesses to having given her name to the reporter. Futon takes advantage of the confusion to grab his gun from under the pillow. He forces Siams to pack his things and attempts to escape, but Hammerstein pursues him and shoots him in the shoulder before the Terracuda can be reprogrammed. Still free to make his choices, the Terracuda decides to take one of Futon's arms and then returns to get the rest. Resuming the original plan, the three return to the van and head toward the Mundo del March. On the way, the Terracuda begins attacking the vehicle, causing Siams to give up on teamwork. He throws the computer out the window, forcing the other two to leave the car in hopes of being a more appetizing target for the aerial predator. The creature chooses Hammerstein and follows him to the beach while Lorena hides in the restroom. Face to face with danger, he charges at the Terracuda with only a knife and miraculously manages to escape. From the men's restroom, he talks to Lorena and checks that she is okay. Shortly after, a tentacle pierces the ceiling to caress his old friend's face. Predicting what will happen, she quickly leaves the restroom, but it is too late to avoid another Titan duel. She begins to say it will be more challenging to capture them, but then notices she is speaking to herself. Hammerstein says he has unfinished business to resolve and walks away. Hearing the ambulance sirens, Lorena rushes back to the park and manages to speak with Moises, who survived the attack but is still in bad shape. Meanwhile, Siams is talking to the terrorists who hired Futon, interested in his now available position. He begins to negotiate the price of building an army of Terracudas when Hammerstein arrives armed and at the breaking point of his patience. He forces the former boss onto a boat and begins to row. Once he is far enough away, Hammerstein shoots the hull. Siams is then contested by the two monsters, but neither wins the fight, and the prize is split in half. After settling the score, Hammerstein takes Siams's files to Lorena, and she begins to study the Terracuda, discovering that the creature is attracted to shiny objects. They then devise a new plan, and minutes later, both head out on a boat and use a disco ball to lure the beast. Biting the bait, the Terracuda quickly pursues them, but then Lorena is knocked into the water, and Hammerstein stops the boat. The sharktopus immediately surfaces and positions itself in front of Lorena, as if protecting her from the Terracuda. As she swims back to the boat, the two hybrids fight once more, and then it is time to put the plan to the test. With a harpoon, Hammerstein inserts an explosive device into the Terracuda and moves away. Seconds later, the device triggers a tremendous explosion, sending pieces of one of the monsters flying out of the water. In a sad tone, Lorena asks if both are really gone. Hammerstein assures her they are, but the last thing we see is the sharktopus clinging to the boat, opening its mouth to devour them.